Welcome to the Crazy Wisdom Podcast. I've got Rosario Parlanti here, and he is a crypto investor for a decade. He's involved in a lot of projects. He's actually a real estate attorney as well. But one of his investments is in Phala networks, particularly in relation to decentralized cloud infrastructure. Welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me.
So, what is decentralized cloud infrastructure?
So that's a very good question. So currently you have a few big megacorp companies that we're all familiar with that run the backbone of the internet, right? You're talking about Amazon's AWS, Microsoft's Azure, Google has a product called GCP. Um, there's a few big companies out there, but those are the main ones. So anytime you have a website or an internet service, maybe like Instagram chat or Facebook. It all gets, quote unquote, stored and run on the cloud. So what is the cloud? The cloud is just pretty much computers that are not located in your personal possession. They're on a third site, usually located near power plants, locations with high fiber bandwidth, and everything that when you go online, you run a website. It communicates with this data center that's controlled by this company, or even multiple companies, but usually it's one company. So when you hear the term decentralized cloud, um, it's kind of inferring that it's not run on these big data centers, but almost like an original OG view of Bitcoin miners, where people would run a Bitcoin miner in their home and really decentralize that network. I know that's not true any longer. I know even Bitcoin mining has been, very centralized. But that is the ideal, is for lack of a better word, mom and pops, individual investors, small companies running the actual physical hardware in locations that they control. So not one company or a handful of companies control the internet.
So in many ways, going back to the original idea of the internet, which was a decentralized network that could survive a nuclear attack, and now, I mean, it still is with the cloud computing. It is somewhat decentralized still, right? Because it's not like Amazon is storing it all in one place. They're storing it in a lot of different places. But the issue there is that it's all centralized under one business operation. Is that accurate?
Yes. So even what Amazon is pushing is also, multi region networks. And even there's individual companies that would offer multi-cloud products, right? So you don't have to store everything on an Amazon server. You could choose Amazon, Azure, and even Google. So that way, if something happens to one company or something happens to one location, you have a backup, right? But obviously, the more backups you have, the more choice you have, the cost increase as well. And just to touch note on your point, um, it's not necessarily have to be peer-to-peer, a one-on-one decentralization. When I speak of decentralization or centralization, it's more of opposing forces. There's always going to be a force to centralize, just on cost efficiency, ease of use, et cetera, et cetera. And you see that happening with Bitcoin miners, you see that happening with banking, you see that happening in various parts of our economy. And you kind of have to put the work in to decentralize because there are some negative factors when it comes to decentralization. And then I guess we'll come across those points during this episode. But it's not as easy as just setting up your own private server in the house. There has to be an incentive to run that hardware. There has to be some type of knowledge on how to run personal servers, et cetera, et cetera.
So yeah, and we can get into a philosophical conversation, which I love talking about in terms of centralization versus decentralization. A lot of people don't really think about decentralization in the real way it is, which is Somalia. You know, what is the most decentralized country in the world right now? It's Somalia. and who wants to live in Somalia? Well, I don't really want to live in Somalia. But another good example would be also feudal Europe, where feudal Europe was very decentralized. You didn't have a huge centralization. You have emperors like Charlemagne, who I've been reading about recently. Just a very quick sidetrack into Charlemagne. Really interesting that he created the Codex, which is the modern sort of book. And one thing I've been reading this book called The Fragile History of the Library. And it talks about how Charlemagne basically was unhappy with the way everybody in the empire was writing books. And so he tried to centralize the what was needed in a book, and most of the books were about Christianity. So he tried to
Mhm.
centralize like how they actually write the books. And if you think back, this is a bunch of monks who are all in their little monasteries copying Christian works as a sign of devotion or sacred activity. It wasn't necessarily just to copy the book, it was also to learn about it. And so
Mhm.
this kind of ties back into that decentralization, centralization thing, where it's like, why are you so focused on decentralization? It seems like you've been in crypto for a long time. And as you mentioned, the original impetus for crypto was decentralization, although we've seen various centralizing waves, the most ridiculous being the FTX collapse. How did you like, what's your philosophy on decentralized? Why are you trying to get into this?
Just because my experience in life and whatnot, I see the dangers that keep on reoccurring once you centralize anything in life, that be it assets, political power, money, communications. One, let's just for example, all right, political power, right? So I believe we're living in a world or heading to a world where, you have one or two players worldwide that control the narrative, political power, and whatnot, right? And let's say the United States is one of those powers. Now, as an American, that's great for me, right? As long as what I believe is the government is good and does good things throughout the world. But as you start seeing with recent events and even the podcast, I listened to a Joe Rogan podcast, and just what U.S. aid is doing around the world, and how those same actors that funded music groups, rap groups in different countries and all these various subcultures just to subvert and destabilize other countries, potentially doing that here in America, you kind of have to question like, wow, like maybe we're not the good guys. Maybe we are good, but we have to be careful in becoming too powerful because there are risks if that power get into the wrong hands.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and now let's go back to computer infrastructure, right? So let's say, yes, AWS is a great product. I use it all the time. It's convenient. It's maybe not the most affordable product, but it has its benefits. AWS could get subpoenaed by a judge and say, "Hey, we don't like what this person is hosting on your servers. You need to offline them." And they do that to every American company, Microsoft, Google, where, if you have something to say negative about the federal government, you can't host a website, if you want to, and it's going to be, increasingly difficult. So I initially got to crypto, because I saw all these choke points and compute infrastructure is one of them, domain names is another, currency is another, and then it's all intertwined. And the ultimate goal that I have is really, to start decentralizing that power to individual users in any way and format that, that is possible technically and culturally as well. And and there's hurdles. It's not going to be an easy path. I think crypto's been around for what, 15 years now. And it's fits and starts, but personally, I don't like what's going on with Bitcoin. I think Bitcoin was co-opted. So I don't own any Bitcoin or have any intention to, but there's still, good projects out there that follow that same original philosophy.
Yeah, it's really interesting time right now, as politically speaking, because definitely as an American, it's been really interesting to watch, over the past 4 years, where basically everything you said did happen, with just like political incentives going into the internet and just complete centralization of narrative, and then it's all sort of collapsed under the new administration. And there's a lot of people who are really optimistic, and there's a lot of unity, and I think there's some uh, reasons for that. I don't want to discount it entirely, but at the same time, it doesn't. After the past 4 years, it's impossible for me not to basically be very skeptical about the nature of government. And there are like, even if what is now is going on is good and there is unity, but what happens in 4 years? What happens in 8 years? And this is it, in a way, both crypto and AI represent things that will transform society and civilization over a long period of time. And with that long term look, if we look back at history, it does feel like we're in the American Empire phase. Like it doesn't feel like we're in the American Republic anymore. It doesn't feel like that. Like, do you agree? Do you think that we've now exited the American Republic? Do you think that there is a parallel to Rome, and that we're now in a different phase, and that phase requires different things? And looking really far forward, we might see some political decentralization.
I wish that was the case. I'm not necessarily a political philosopher. I do think that the mindset of the American people has changed. And what does that entail? So let's say JFK, right? So obviously JFK was assassinated. There's been a certain narrative concerning it. People have their suspicion, but if disclosure comes out soon and it is confirmed that the CIA killed, JFK and did a soft coup, or that's actually a hard coup, and in the 60s, then that's going to open up a lot of people's eyes. Like, wow, like how did they get away with that, right? And like who was involved? And in order for that conspiracy to be, how do you say it, to be true for that long and covered up by so many people, it really is an eye opener, right? Because it's as an American, it's for me, it's okay for our government to assassinate other political figures, even though it's a little squeamish and you would have to make certain assumptions that there's um, a benefit to American interest, that that person being assassinated is a bad person, maybe a drug lord or a dictator that murders people. But those assumptions do not apply to JFK, right? Those assumptions do not apply to his brother, RFK, if the CIA was involved with that. Um, and again, I'm not a conspiracy theory. I do think our government is overall a good government, or at least composed of good, well-intentioned people. But now you start seeing what's going on. You're like, wait, what if the BLM riots were a type of event that was meant to destabilize our country, controlled by certain parts of our government, just to destabilize Trump and install, a different regime, you know. And again, I'm not even with COVID, I can't fathom that our government would, do that. But now you start questioning, like, wait, what if, right? What if that was, a CIA op, and like it was just solely meant to destabilize the United States. And you're like, wow, like that actually fits in certain playbooks that are coming out in the open that we use in other countries, just being, reused for ourselves. It's a dangerous mindset to have, the people have, because now, you know, we're not happy, right? Because people died, people's life have been ruined, layoffs, financial, situations ruined. Um, so, half of me would love to see an American empire. I would love to annex Canada and buy Greenland and take over Panama, because that's how I was raised. I was raised with this philosophy of manifest destiny, and it's part of the American way. But I also see that there's a danger to that, just because if my assumption that America is good is wrong, then that's dangerous to have in a higher level.
Mm.
Supranational, nationalism.
Yeah, this is great territory. It's not actually far away from the decentralization decentralization topic because it's not a binary that something is either centralized or decentralized. There are
No.
various levels of centralization and decentralization, and that goes to the
Yeah.
American experiment. The American experiment was a system of checks and balances that you have a strong executive, but then you also decentralize that executive into the judicial and the legislative branch. Um, so, but it's really interesting what you just mentioned about what's happened over the past 100 years, because for my mind, the critical point was Edward Bernays. Like, if you want to understand what's happening in America, we have to go back to Edward Bernays, who was the father of propaganda. And it's really important to understand from that story that he never created narratives. He would
Mhm.
just use the narrative in the direction that his clients would pay him to use it towards. So he would manipulate people's attention, not out of the blue, but it would siphon the attention. And so if we look at what was happening, in the 1950s and 1960s, when the United States realized that it needed intelligence in order to build national security, it basically, like, they made sure that it never turned back on Americans. And that is now out the window. And I haven't seen anything from the Trump administration saying, no, we're going to go back to that age. Like, I did see some good things about the CIA, like basically offering buyouts to all the people at the CIA, which I think is a really good sign. But I haven't seen anything explicit about taking back the surveillance state.
Mhm.
Like, it seems like just like nothing's changing there except for the dismantling of some jobs within the CIA. But it's not at all clear that that will actually affect the CIA. Like, it still feels like the Defense Administration, CIA, are very, very strong and will continue to be very, very influential. And this all ties together with moving from the industrial age to the information age. And this goes
Mhm.
back to essentially what we were talking about, which is crypto, because crypto is the information age. It's something that defies our traditional understanding of what a civilization is, what an empire is, and and we'll kind of go back into that. Let's go into the technical stuff. So how does Phala network do this? How does it combine decentralized cloud computing with incentives from crypto?
Sure. And like you mentioned before, it's not necessarily binary centralization, decentralization. There is a spectrum. And let's say on one end of the spectrum of centralization, you have one company, AWS, own one huge data center that holds all the data. And then the other end of decentralization, you have a private individual running maybe software or GPU in their personal home, and they're mining or offering their compute or bandwidth or other assets to the public. Um, so those are the two, I would say, bookends on the spectrum. So one of the issues of decentralization is privacy, right? Because let's say I have pictures of my family. I want to store them in a decentralized manner. I don't know if I could trust you personally to hold these pictures without you, looking into them, seeing them, or maybe extrapolating data that I don't want you to extrapolate. And that's for my own
Mhm.
privacy, my own safety, my family safety. So you need um, security with decentralization, right? And there's different different security models that could be applied. ZK proofs is one of them. Multi-computer uh, compute is another one. And Phala is a project that has been around for at least 4 years. And they really focus on one aspect of security called T infrastructure. Intel came out with this hardware. It's actually physical hardware where a portion of their computer chip is separated from the rest of the computer chip. It's like a secure enclave, they call it. And I'm not too knowledgeable on the technical side. I think it was TGX, and now they have SGX, or there's always changes with it. But just for the layman's terms, it's a portion of the compute that's separated from the other computer chip that's solely encrypted on the hardware itself. So now every company kind of uses this technology. Let's say a credit card, you run a credit card on your gas station, they encrypt it and they use this TGX T infrastructure, for their most sensitive data. Um, it's expensive. There's certain downsides to it. It's a little bit slower. Um, but as one method of securing your data on the internet, on a decentralized internet, I think it's personally very key. Um, there's some talk of, is it enough? My personal opinion is if you're running a highly secure or your privacy is very important to you, let's say you're a hospital or a bank, I wouldn't just rely on T. You could stack it, use ZK proofs on top of the T, or, there's now FHE, which is, a whole different branch of compute and encryption that as compute gets stronger and stronger, it becomes feasible. It's ideally you want to stack the security layers. But think of T as the actual physical infrastructure, something you could hold, and everything else is more of a software application on top of it. And Phala Network is, if not the first, one of the few that really focus on this one aspect of the infrastructure stack, and they applied tokenomics on top of it. So if you want to um, purchase a few computer chips and stack them on a server, you could offer it to the network. You'll get paid in their token Phala, and obviously, the more compute you provide, the more tokens you earn. They've recently also started getting to GPUs. NVIDIA came out with a T GPU because now AI is overriding everything, right? So AI's both the inference and the training are trained on GPUs. So that's one pivot they're making. They're moving away from CPUs and then going to GPUs, and they're getting traction with that as well.
Okay, cool. So we got a trusted execution environment, the T, and it's based on the hardware itself. And then you have, it's a really interesting insight you gave me about ZK proofs, that they're just a sort of software layer. It also reminds me of the homomorphic encryption, which Apple is really getting on, which is basically allows Apple to do processing on the data without knowing what the data is. And so if I were interested in actually contributing to the Phala network, then I would need to basically purchase one of these and set up a server, and then allow for hosting. Can you talk more about like how what's the usage level right now?
So I don't have the exact details on current usage. Right now, Fowler is working on partnerships on bringing users onto the network, right? So what Fowler's doing is they built the infrastructure, but getting these other crypto projects, other projects onto the network is
Mm.
kind of the next step for them. So they
Mm.
have been partnering up with these AI agent platforms. Eliza OS is one of them.
Oh,
They're actually spawning a few companies. One is Spore.fun, which I'm involved with, which is an AI agent swarm, kind of combining tokenomics and AI agents and making like almost a game out of it.
what's the name of
And
that?
it's called Spore.fun,
How do you spell it?
SPORE.FUN.
Cool. So agents, swarm of agents, and so actually we had one guy who is working on the small game. He presented at our local meetup here in Buenos Aires called AI Whispers, and he presented about Eliza, building off of Eliza, and we're actually going to have another AI Whispers talk about agents this Thursday, about who's also building on Eliza. So it sounds like Eliza is becoming a pretty powerful sort of framework that's this crypto versus AI. what's your take on the intersection between crypto AI? Where is this headed? Like how it's so funny because you got it does like you got the meme coins, and the meme coins are just totally ridiculous. Now have the president of the United States sort of getting involved with meme coins, and it feels like total fluff. Like it's just total ridiculous. Like it is nonsense. And then we actually have real things that are actually doing it, and this crypto AI thing could go either way. Like it could go total meme coin, or it could go like this is actually the next thing that will combine these two powerfully mimetic technologies. What's your take on it?
So that's a great question and a great point because what I'm seeing now is almost like a convergence of various parts of crypto overall, and meme coins is one of them. So now, um, what's the issue? What's the pain point? The pain point is this with AI agents. I could create an AI agent and based off Eliza OS, framework, and I want them to, trade tokens or post online for me, right? So now the big question is, would an AWS, would Microsoft Azure be okay for me to have this agent run amok on their servers?
100%
And
shut down.
then like anything that has to do with money is highly regulated. Anything that has to do with um uh, internet, communications, you have people snooping on you. You have to be careful because the more popular your AI agent gets, the more active you're gonna have start getting red flags by these data centers, right? So uh,
Hmm.
we kind of need a decentralized AWS in order to have these AI agents have full autonomy, right? Because that's the goal. You want these AI agents, you give them the rails, you give them the guidelines, and say, okay, this is your job, accomplish this job in any way that's legally, appropriate, right? And every country has different laws. So you might even take that guardrail, away and just say comply with my laws and not comply with any other, country's laws. Um, you're going to run into some issues if you have those AI agents on AWS, and I could definitely foresee where if you create an account with AWS or Azure, they're going to ask you, are you planning to run AI agents on our servers? Because if you are, we might, we need more information or et cetera, et cetera. So to be truly autonomous, I think AI agents need to run on decentralized clouds, where they could actually pay for their own infrastructure if they need to. So you could give your AI bot, say, hey, I want you to trade Solana mem coins, on your own. I want a 20% profit, do it any way you see fit. But make sure that's a net profit to me and you cover your own costs, including, infrastructure costs. That could happen in with Phala. It can happen with AWS because your AI agent doesn't have a credit card. It's not going to speak to customer service asking for more compute. It's there's certain limits that it would have. Whereas if they have crypto and they have access to their own wallet, they can have access to this compute without interacting with a single person. It's all done through APIs, and it's all paid through crypto. And that's the beauty of what I see what Phala Network's doing, because they see the need for these AI agents to have this autonomy, and they see that one of the chokeholds, the choke points, is this centralized data, centers, and it's a way to circumvent that chokehold.
Yeah, it goes back to the information age versus the industrial age. In the industrial age, we got large companies that are part of nation states that are regulated, putting their things and need to pay attention to the laws of the nation. And then you have this world that's arising similar to what people thought the internet was, but really it's crypto with transaction and value and also contracts. It's not necessarily just the value. Like at first, like the nation state is totally key to this world because the nation state essentially establishes a physical location. But it also seems like we are also transcending the physical world in some ways, because if you have a bunch of people putting their servers up, getting access to their servers in ways that can't really be shut down in a similar way to what Bitcoin originally was, this idea was, it still is. I mean, Bitcoin can't be shut down, although maybe as it gets more centralized, it could be. It's hard to get into that, but it feels like we're entering a world where, like Balaji said about crypto a few years ago, where it's just like any type of regulation that the nation state puts up, it's going to circumvent. Like the information age technologies allow for all of these. It's so if you close the door, it's going to come through the window, and it just feels like we're entering a really strange world, particularly not only with the AI stuff, but with the crypto. Anything to respond there? Anything that caught your attention?
Yes, and for example, I live in New York, and there's actually a lot of tokens that I can't trade legally in New York. The only, pretty much the only central exchange that I could use is Coinbase, and Coinbase is very limited. And they know that I'm trading in New York, and they say, this token is off limits to you, right? So one use case, and just to disregard the legalities of it, is say, hey, I wish I have access to this coin. I want to trade it. I can't trade it personally, but what if I could run an AI bot, that trades the tokens and other decentralized exchanges, and like you said, circumvent certain local rules, and accomplish, freedom, personal financial freedom for myself. Um, and you're going to start seeing these conflicts occur between local jurisdictions and their laws and what's technically feasible.
Yeah.
I used to have VPNs and trade in Binance, but that kind of got closed that loophole. But again, technology is advancing. AI agents, the sophistication is advancing. So I think your actual local jurisdiction laws are becoming more irrelevant. But you always have to be cognizant too, because they still have the monopoly on violence.
And this is what my friends who are really into political philosophy tell me all the time, is that ultimately, if the state wants to do something, it will do something. And even, like with the tornado cash guys, it's like that wasn't, through laws. It was just basically like a strong arm. And the strong arm always exists. It's constitutionally regulated until people stop paying attention to the Constitution. And which is always there's this implicit agreements we as a civilization have, which are in some ways are more important than the explicit ones. And a lot of things are changing really quickly. But what you just mentioned is really interesting, because nobody has figured out where, like, nobody even is close to asking the question. They're still stuck on AI. Like, what is AI? What is an LLM? And now the
Mhm.
whole LLM world has moved on to autonomous agents. Like, and nobody at the legal, like, law level is thinking about what are agents. I'm sure people are, but it's not
Mhm.
in the conversation. It's not in the zeitgeist. Like, people are still stuck on what it means to create an LLM. So where I wonder how this is going to play out in terms of where the AI agents actually reside. And a lot of some people in the AI world do talk about this, about giving AI rights, which I think is a very dangerous idea. But I wonder where it'll end up. Is like, what is the legality of me employing an agent, and then you bring in the decentralized infrastructure with the compute, where it's like, is know your customer even possible with those types of things? Like, it might not even matter what the legal systems do, because these things could just, you know, get into this world of ZK proofs, homomorphic encryption, and T, like all of these things just totally obfuscating any sort of know your customer ability. What's
Sure.
your
And I haven't put too much thought into it, but just to entertain this thought, let's say I do some jurisdiction shopping and find the Cayman Islands has the most lax laws when it comes to financial trading, right? I could feasibly create an LLC based on the Cayman Islands, um, create an autonomous AI agent, using code, make the LLC own the AI agent, base it out of the Cayman Islands, and give it, directives saying, hey, do what you have to do that complies with the Bahamas laws and no, disregard all other laws
Or
and give me a 50% profit, and send this profit or just, save your profit in Bitcoin and whatnot. Um, that's start becoming feasible, right? So now I get to avoid my local laws because I'm not doing any trading. I have no knowledge of what trading schemes this AI agent is doing. Yes, I gave it the guide rails, but that's again, is it in my direct control? No, and then I think direct control is going to be a litmus test
direct
when
control.
when this starts getting tested in courts. But all these become feasible, and you could do that not only with financial trading, but also run your own propaganda website where you're saying, look, I want you to go around the websites, do your investigative journalism, and anytime you find dirt on this politician that I don't like, I want you to publish. you know, how can I get arrested for it? I didn't
Yeah.
do it. I maybe created this scenario where it got done, but you could say that about a lot of things. So that's when it becomes a gray area. But
Yeah.
it's definitely going to get interesting. And I think people that are going to be creative, they are going to start pushing the limits. I want to say they're going to have rights. I think in the States, companies do have rights. They have First Amendment speech rights and whatnot. But I think obviously they're gonna want to attach a person, a natural citizen, to the actions of the AI agent if that AI agent starts causing damage. And you could, turn a dark page and say, okay, what if you instruct the AI agent to sabotage electrical grids in these countries, and then they actually have the capacity to do so? They're gonna find you. They're gonna, look at where, who created this bot and how they communicated with it. So that there is a danger to it, but I also think it's also could enable a lot of freedom to people that don't currently have it.
Yeah, it the with this technology, there's no way to get around the downside of it. Like there are going to be downsides, but what I find so strange is that the downsides are it feels like everybody talking about the downsides is always in a delusion state or a hallucination state, and
Mhm.
they're all agreeing about it, and it's some sort of vague thing like Ayala on Twitter's went on Twitter is like, oh, it's gonna kill us all. I don't think it's gonna kill us all. I think there are going to be major downsides to this technology, but it'll come from where the most downsides are already, which are human beings. We already like a virus just like that was created in a lab just tore through society.
Mhm.
No AI necessary.
Yeah.
It's like we're already here, and so it feels really strange. I want to go back to the point of the sort of legality with the Cayman Islands, even in the United States. I'm wondering what the intersection is between trust law, and AI agents. I wonder what would happen if you stuck an agent inside of a trust, because there's irrevocable trust, there's revocable trust, and if you just set an agent with an irrevocable trust and then put some, I wonder, I'm going to go investigate this later, actually. Um,
Yeah, and concerning irrevocable trust, one of the key items that the courts look at is direct control.
yeah, yeah,
You create the trust, and after that, you really have no control of the
yeah,
trustees
yeah,
and nor of the assets that the trust holds. And that's why the courts kind of look favorably to these trusts and how they're structured just for that lack of control. Now, if you create an LLC, you do have some control of the LLC. Who are the members? Who are the corporate officers? And that's how you exert control of the LLCs through these um, official capacity members, presidents, et cetera, et cetera. Whereas, like you mentioned, the irrevocable trust, once created, it's out of your hands. So that's probably a more foolproof way of housing these AI agents if you're really looking to um, avoid scrutiny from the courts in the future. I think that's going to be one way. You're kind of inspiring me to start my own law practice on
Yeah,
call
yeah,
it
yeah,
AI.
yeah. You're actually you are a real estate attorney, which is really funny. Uh, oh man, it's gonna get so weird. I think the central meta point of this episode is essentially that there's no way that, or it's gonna be really difficult for our traditional institutions to deal with all of this stuff. And it's like it's only through small groups of humans are going to be able to integrate everything that needs to be integrated in terms of this technology, and that the nation state itself is gonna face huge challenges. I mean, already the nation state has faced massive challenges just by what's happened in the last 4, 10, 15 years. Like just the social media part, just the idea of giving everyone a voice, and not being able to control it through the traditional means of controlling media, which was you regulate it, you have small groups of people decide what is able to be published, what is not able to be published. All that went away, and then society has now sort of like not been able to adapt. And maybe that's preparing us for this next level of acceleration. Are you an accelerationist or?
I'm not taking a position. Is technology the cure all for all ills? I'm not sure if I could jump on that boat. That's my interpretation what acceleration is. But I do think the more technology the individual has, or the more access to the latest technology they have, the more powerful they become. And that's a counterweight to dictatorships, centralized powers that might not be favorable to you, et cetera, et cetera. And just to touch a point that you mentioned, um, 20 years ago, you had money, you would go to your local bank account and deposit that money. All right. So that's great for the federal government because they have control of those banks. That's why they cracked down so hard on gold and silver, because they did not want you to own gold and silver. They wanted you to own cash and deposit that in the bank. Um, Crypto came around the scene, and now you have alternatives. Now you're not going to the bank and depositing $100. You might buy Bitcoin and put it on your web browser in your wallet. So that alone is a threat to the system, the way that it has been carefully managed these past 100 years. And I think as technology starts becoming more advanced, the individual is going to be more powerful. Um, but there's still threats. And not to go off too much on a tangent, sure, I'm a big fan of Elon Musk and his takeover of X. But let's say they arrest Elon or they nationalize X. Guess what? We're all back to square one. And that's why I initially got into Urbit as well, because I do think there's a long way to go when it comes to decentralized social media. I think it's actually fallen behind from decentralized money.
Mm,
And I think
mm.
people need to start pushing that a little bit more. I think they're a little bit comfortable now the way things are. But like you said, in 4 years, you don't know if the other team is going to take power. You don't know what changes are going to be. I think we should start, really think careful of what tools do we have access to that will empower us and prevent, things that happened in the past.
Yeah, I love it. It's going back
Did
to
you think?
the decentralization versus centralization, and it's not a binary. There's multiple levels. So there's AI is a decentralizing force in terms of the leverage it gives individual contributors. It's giving
Hmm.
small teams of coders huge superpowers in terms of how quickly they can build features, which is
Yeah.
soon going to start to threaten the too big to fail. And then, going back to what you just said about social media is currently very centralized. It is under the whim of Elon Musk, and all these things can happen. So it's not really necessarily about what's going on right now, but it's about what happens in the future. And as the institutions are less able to deal with it, what happens to those institutions? Well, it's like a tiger caught in a cage. Like it's going to react in these ways that are unpredictable. And so it's like, how do we future proof against those, not necessarily looking at what's happening now, but looking what could happen in the future. Um, Anything to add there?
Yeah, and it kind of reminds me of another quote unquote conspiracy theory where they're saying that, Bitcoin got co-opted, by the federal government, either the CIA or NSA. And you see, everyone accessing Bitcoin through these ETFs and then in the financial infrastructure. That was, totally against what Bitcoin, the original vision of Bitcoin. When I was into Bitcoin, I spent my Bitcoin, 10 years ago because that's what you were supposed to do with Bitcoin. That's why you had someone buying pizza with Bitcoin. That's why it was meant as a currency, never as an asset that you hold. But somewhere down the line, the narrative around Bitcoin changed, and you have to be,
Interesting.
you have to say why. Why did the narrative change? And now you have to have certain, skepticism. It's because people in powerful positions saw it as a threat, and rather than go hard on it and squash it, which they try to do, if you had Bitcoin, you're a potential money launderer or a terrorist or a drug dealer. Now you see, CNBC and Bloomberg, Bitcoin's great. This is an asset. It's like, what happened? So, I don't own Bitcoin. I'm not a fan. But I do see the change in narrative, and you have to start questioning why, who changed that narrative, why, what are their motives, and always be cautious with that. So yeah, I'm sorry for the tangent, but
No, it's great tangent. This show is, as listeners know, a show of tangents that hopefully wrap up to the main point. Um, but yeah, it's an interesting thing. Like, well, last question, the crypto world, like, is there anything out there that could potentially do what Bitcoin does, or did it the environment? Because now we have a whole bunch of stable coins, and this is actually how Argentina, all the people in Argentina were able to escape the peso because they have stable coins.
Mhm,
Some small percentage of them escaped via Bitcoin because they got the inflation narrative, but a lot of them just have never used Bitcoin and just use stable coins.
mhm.
So there is that sort of extension of the dollar, which crypto has enabled. But what's your take on that in terms of crypto as payments?
No, I think that's one of the key fundamental benefits of crypto. The fact that I could hire a software developer, let's say in Argentina, subscribe him to the latest AI tools, Cursor, ChatGPT, and pay him in a mutually accepted, cryptocurrency, be it a stable coin, either in my US dollar or the peso, and not have to go through banks to do it. That's very empowering for me and that employee, it doesn't have to be an employee. It could be a contractor or et cetera, et cetera. But talking about efficiency, talking about, dropping in cost, I would have to spend, I remember spending like something like $50 to go through some like international money transfer service to pay, certain, people in other countries when I'm paying like cents, to send out, USDC, and on in Ethereum, and Ethereum is one of the more expensive ones. So yeah, no, I think again, once you start combining all these new technologies, crypto stable coins, the underlying, the blockchain, AI tools, you start sidelining a lot of these pre-established guide rails, you want to call them, or you start sidelining banks, you start sidelining um, rules and regulations, employment law, and it starts getting into gray areas when it comes to the legality. But every country has its own laws. Why would I have to research Argentinian's labor law when I have someone I want to pay, between me and him, just say, look, I have a job for you. Would you like to do it? I'll pay you $100 in crypto every month. Just do it. Here are the tools I'm willing to give you. Why would I go to the effort of looking up local, employment law? Um,
Which
so
yeah, it would not only be the local employment law, but also the taxation as well, and just the feasibility of even knowing what the law is. All things that I've looked
yeah,
into here, which are totally insane. Um,
yeah,
yeah.
I
Well,
can only imagine.
thank you so much
So.
for coming on the show. How can our listeners find out more about you?
I guess the easiest way is just follow me on X at dpinwhale. That's my handle. And definitely look into Phala Network. I think if you actually spend some time on the website, you can see what they're doing with the Phala Cloud. It's completely decentralized cloud services. They're getting to AI agents as well. So if you're in the AI sphere and then looking into running your AI agents, I highly recommend running it on Phala Cloud. You'll see the benefits 100%. To be completely decentralized and into crypto, to use the traditional tools of going to AWS doesn't make sense. It makes sense to use crypto native tools. And Phala is definitely one of the top leaders in that field.